Hi and welcome to the 6th challenge of this series. In this one, our task is to capitalize the first letter. Now let's really understand what the challenge is. The challenge says if we have any kind of string, we need to have the first letter of every word capitalized like this, cosmic radiation, and then all the other letters within that string or within that specific word, they should be lowercase. For example, if there is like a string like this T is uppercase, we need to make sure that when we are uppercasing the R, we need to lowercase the T as well, if there is a typo or something like that. So the first language that I'm going to tackle this in is going to be JavaScript. Now we need to have some sort of a variable that is going to house our input string. Our input string, our test string is cosmic radiation. And then we are going to have some kind of an output that is going to hold the value of the output string for us, the thing that we have actually calculated and produced. So in here, I could create a function that is going to be called cap first letter or capitalize first letter. This is going to accept our input string, and this is going to give us some methods and the way that we come up with our output string. Before actually talking about how we're going to basically manage this, I need to tackle two edge cases. The first thing is if our string has some spaces at the start of it like this and some space at the end of it, let's trim that out. So I'm going to say trimmed stir, and this is going to be our input string, and we already have this method that says trim. And there was a challenge in this series where we actually trimmed the white space. Here we go. That was the first challenge. You can just go take a look at this challenge or take a look at the video for that if you want to. Now, what if the user passes nothing? For example, what if the user just doesn't pass and our input string is an empty string? Now, in that scenario, we're going to say, what if trimmed string is empty? Then we return an empty string. Now that all of this is done, let's see what this function is going to return for us. So we grab our trimmed string. We know that it doesn't have any spaces at the start and at the end, and we know for a fact that it has at least one word inside of it. And with all of this info in mind, let's see how do we want to distinguish between words. So we want to capitalize the first letter of every word. A word in a string or in a sentence is separated. Words are separated by spaces. So if there is a space between two things, that means those two things are two words. So we need to take a look at the spaces. Now keep in mind, we got rid of the space at the start and at the end. So essentially our string is going to look like this. Now I'm explaining this in more depth. The reason for it is because the logic in other languages is going to be almost the same thing. The methods are going to be different, of course, but the logic is going to be the same thing. So I'm explaining the logic, and then we are going to implement this logic for other languages as well. So here with JavaScript, we have this split method, and this you pass it something, for example, an empty space, and then it is going to convert that string into as many pieces as it can while splitting in this empty space, and it's going to give you substrings. Now, I want to make this a little bit interesting. That's why I'm going to actually use a regular expression. And if I pass in a /s, that is going to basically take a look at one individual white space. If I pass in a plus, that is going to take a look at one or more occurrences of a white space. And that's exactly what we want. Why do we want to look at one or more? Because sometimes there is a typo and there could be like several spaces. And in this scenario, we still want to distinguish, and we still want to come up with this idea that this cosmic and this radiation are two different words. If I take a look, if I get rid of the plus, it is only going to take a look at one space, but it could be one or more. Now that we have split our string into substrings, we can map over them. So as soon as I do dot map, we have this method available to us. Now, if I map over this, that means this is now an array. And how many items are in that array? It doesn't really matter. In this scenario, there are two items. One is cosmic and the other one is radiation. So I could just call them two words. Now, the map method is going to do one specific thing for one item inside of the array, and then it's going to repeat that several times. And how many times? As many times as there are items within that array. So in this array, we have two items. The map method is going to repeat this logic that I'm about to write 2 times. So what do we want to do? We want to select a word, get the first letter, capitalize it, and then get the rest of the letters and lowercase them. So let's do that. So we're going to select a word. How do we get the first letter of that? We can just say, give me the thing that is at the index of 0. That's going to be the first letter. And we're going to say dot to uppercase. This is going to uppercase it for us. But then we need to add on to it or concatenate the rest of the words, the rest of the letters as well. So we're going to say word. Now we got the first letter and we basically capitalized that. What about the rest of the letters? We are going to say slice. Now we're going to slice the word starting from the second letter, and that's going to have an index of 1. And as many letters as there are, we're going to say to lowercase. And finally, now this is, keep in mind, we did our operation, and this is going to give us an array with 2 items in which the letters are capitalized for the starting point in every word. But we need to have a string. Keep in mind, the input is a string, the output is a string. So if I do the join method, this is going to join all of the items of an array and convert it into a string, but we need to have some kind of a separator, and that's going to be an empty space. And this should be it. So we have this. I'm going to keep it like this. That's our input string. Let's create our output stir as well. Simple stuff, right? And in here, I could say cap first letter, and then I'm going to pass in my input string. And now let's log our output string. Let's save everything. Make sure you are within the correct directory. And in here, I'm going to say node a capitalized first letter. Let's hit enter, and there we go. So we got rid of all of these spaces in the middle using this expression. And then we capitalized the first letter of every word while lowercasing all the others. So we could just test this for some cases. For example, this last S is capital, the T is capital, and maybe the C at the end of cosmic is also capital. And let's add some spaces at the start and some spaces at the end. Let's save that. Let's clear. Let's run this again, and there we go. We get the same result. So our logic works. Now that this JavaScript part is done, let's jump into TypeScript and let's see how we can solve this with TypeScript. Now for TypeScript, of course, if I just copy paste this, for the most part, this is going to work. But what I want to do is come up with a different way of achieving the same result. To get started with the TypeScript solution, the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to create our function, which is called capitalized first letter. This is still going to accept a string, but the type of this is going to be string. And what this function is going to return for us at the end of the day is going to be a string as well. Now, the first thing that we did in JavaScript was we actually took a look at how, if there are any white spaces, we need to get rid of them. And we are going to do the same thing here using the trim method. We have access to the same method. And what if the user has not passed in anything? So if the trim stir is actually equal to an empty string, we do not want to do anything. We just want to return an empty string. Now, let's move on and let's just jump into the actual solution. So what do I want to do here? I want to create, now I did say I want to go a different way. So I'm going to create a result array. Its initial value is going to be an array, but what is going to be its type? The type of this is going to be an array of strings. So this could be for us like something like this. So it could be a C and then it could be an O, so it's like this. And then after some iterations, we could have an empty space in there, so something like this. This is what I want to end up with. All right, now that I've created my result, I'm going to create two state variables because I need to keep track of when I have an empty space, when I have several empty spaces, as we talked about in our JavaScript version, and when I need to capitalize the first letter and I should not capitalize the rest of the letters. In fact, I should just lowercase all of them. And to be able to do all of this, we need to keep track of something. And when you keep track of something, that's basically state. Capitalize next. Initially, this is going to be set to true. And what is the reason for that? Let me grab my input string from the JavaScript version, and I'm just going to pass it right here. Comment out the second one, just comment in the first one. So when I say capitalize next and I set it to true, initially, these are going to be Boolean variables. That's because the first letter, the first word, and the first letter of that has to be capitalized as well. That's why it's initially set to true. But since we have trimmed all the white spaces, I need to keep track of white spaces between the words. I don't have any at the start. I don't have any at the end. So at the inside of the string. So for that, I'm going to say previous was space. And I'm going to come back to why I called it previous was space. For now, what you need to keep in mind is I'm looking for one white space. And if there are several of them, like here, since I'm not passing in regular expression, I don't want to do anything. I just want to treat, if there is one space or 100, I want to treat them equally. So let's move forward. In here, I am going to iterate over our string, our trimmed string, and each iteration, I want to select one character from it, one letter from it. So I'm going to say for const char or character of trimmed string, what do I want to do? Now, remember our distinguishing factor? What was that? That was a space. So that's going to be the most important part of our entire calculation. So I'm going to create an if statement. I'm looking for a white space, and then I'm going to have some logic that's going to handle that white space for me. But what if, as I am iterating over my string, over my input string, the individual characters are not a white space? That's going to fall into this else clause. So if I'm within the if clause, that means I have hit an empty space. So what do I do with that? Now, the way that this solution is going to work is we're going to populate our result array with individual letters, as I said, individual letters, and then we're going to combine all of them into a string. So when I want to populate it by individual letters, I need to pass in one letter at a time. So the most important letter for us is going to be the white space. So if character is equal to a space, that means I have hit a space, basically. So what if there are multiple spaces? I need to take a look at if the previous one was a space as well. You could have called it the next was a space, but I'm just going to call it the previous. So if I have hit a space, I'm going to say that the previous one is not a space because I don't care how many spaces there are between two words. If there is 1 or 100, that means we just have two words. So I'm going to flip the value of previous was space. I'm going to say that is false, which is going to be its initial state. So if I just get rid of this negation operator, it means that previous was space is true, and it means that we have hit several spaces and we want to push all of them into our array. No, it doesn't matter how many spaces there are. We just want to grab our result array and we want to push how many spaces? We just want to push one space. All right, that's why we go about it like this. Now, once I've pushed this white space into my string, array, which is the result, what do I want to do next? I want to make sure that I do not pass in any other white space in here. Now, keep in mind, anything that's within this if statement, it only works if previous is false. If I set the value of previous to true, we are not going to jump into this if statement. All right, this if statement is not going to work. That's why I'm going to say previous is true, because I've added one space. I don't want to add any other spaces, so I do not want to come into this if statement anymore. I've already done that. And now that we have handled our white space, let's jump into the else clause, which is responsible for handling our characters. Now, what if we hit a character? Now, we handled the white space here. Let's talk about what if we hit a character. What do we want to do in that scenario? Well, we want to take a look at our capitalize next. Is this set to true? If this is set to true, why is it called capitalize next? Because if we are talking about a space, the next thing is going to be a letter that we want to capitalize. After a space, after one space, or it doesn't matter how many spaces there are, we just added one space, remember? And after that space, don't we capitalize the letter immediately that is coming next? That's why this is called capitalize next. And the reason that this was called previous with space is because once we hit a space, we take a look at if the previous one was a space as well, if the previous character was a space as well. But for capitalization, we take a look at the next character, if that's something that we want to capitalize. So if capitalize next is set to true, it means we just jumped over a space. So the next thing that we want to do is we want to grab our result and we want to push in there the character, but we want to uppercase it. So to uppercase right here. Now, keep in mind, we need to lowercase all the other ones. So in this scenario, I'm going to grab my capitalize first letter and I'm going to set it to false, because as long as, sorry, this should be capitalize next. Because as long as this is false, we're not going to be even inside of this if statement. We are only inside of this if statement if capitalize next is set to true. If it is false, we're going to jump over this if statement. We're going to go to the else clause. That means, what does that mean? It means we capitalize the first letter. Okay, we pushed it to our results array, and then we want to lowercase all the other letters. And we don't care how many letters there are. That's why there is not any kind of logic in here. So we just grab all the remaining characters and we're going to say that to lowercase. And during this process, since we are going from one character of a word to a next, and then from that to next, from that to next, during this process, we don't have any white space. So we're going to set that back to false. Basically, we're resetting our state variable that we created. So what is this going to give us? Now, make sure you really understand where all of these start and where they end. So we had this initial if statement and the initial else. The if was responsible for the white space. The else was responsible for all of our letters. And then we had something within the if, and then we had something within the else clause. Now, what we want to do next is we need to first understand what did we end up with. So this is what we ended up with. So we have this array. If I have my cosmic radiation, the first letter is capital. I'm going to go a little bit. I'm going to try to make it a little bit faster. So I have this, and then I have cos, and then M, and then what is that? What comes after that? I have O, and then after this, I have S, and then there is one, because I pushed in one space, there is that space, and then the same thing happens for radiation as well. So you can see I have a bunch of letters inside of my string. What do I want to do with all of these letters? I want to say, I want to return something, and that's going to be this result. I just want to convert it to a string. I want to join it. Now, when I want to join it, what do I want to join it at? In JavaScript, we joined it at an empty space, a white space, because we didn't have any white spaces in our array. But here we added that white space. But then if you don't want to join it at anything, the join function or method it's going to accept an empty string. And that's it. So let's save that. Let's have our output here. That's going to be cap first letter. And in here, I'm going to pass in our input string. And let's log our output. Let's see if there is any error. We're going to fix that. Whoops, clear. So TSC B hyphen enter. Very good. Now let's run this node B capitalize first letter.js. And there we go. We got cosmic radiation. Now the problem, what is the problem here? The problem is that we capitalized the C, it is capital, but we didn't capitalize the R. So cosmic radiation. Now I'm gonna do a couple of iterations. So let's add this. So we have some spaces at the start, we have some spaces at the end. These letters, the T and the S, are also capital. So let's try that before coming up with a way to fix this problem. So let's run now. There we go. So we can see that the lowercasing of all letters except the first one, that works. The problem is after the space, after we have found the space, we're not capitalizing this R. Why is this C capital? That's because initially our capitalize next is set to true. That's why it is capitalizing that for us. But after we have found, so the problem is within this if statement. How do I know the problem is right here? It's because I have found the space. I have set the previous was space to true, so I don't find any other spaces, but I didn't do with my capital. I didn't say capitalize the next word. And in here, if I take a look at that here, so let me show it to you. So in here, I'm only capitalizing if this capital next is true, but this was true for this first C. It is not true for this R. We didn't set it true for the R. So let's set that true here. Again, how do I know? Because keep in mind, which letter is not being capital? The one that comes after a space. So where did we handle that space? We handled that space right here. So in here, I'm going to say capitalize next, set it to true. And then from this capitalize next, we're going to jump into this if statement and we're going to capitalize that. So let's save that. Let's run it again. And there we go. Cosmic radiation. Very cool stuff, right? And we have our spaces at the start. We have our spaces at the end. Now, what if I join all of this string, all of this array at an empty space? Let's save that. Let's take a look at the result. And let's run node. This is what we get. This is the problem. So the problem is that we join all of the letters at a space. So there is going to be one space between each two letters. Well, if this is something you're looking for, this is a good effect, but this is not something that I'm looking for. So I'm just going to get rid of that and I'm going to save it. And one final time, let's run it. We have our cosmic radiations. So this is the solution for the TypeScript version of this problem. Let's jump in and let's talk about the Python version. That's the next language. And for this one, we are going to have some sort of a function. The way we define functions in Python is we have this def keyword, which stands for define. In JavaScript, we had the function keyword itself. In here, we have the def. Much like we had some keyword func for Go and fn for Rust. Now, what do I want to do here is, the next thing is we need to basically write the name of our function. It is going to be capitalized. This is snake case, so the first letter of the variable shouldn't be capital. Capitalize first letter. This is going to accept a string. Now in Python, we don't have any curly braces. We just have indentation. And the way that we're going to go about this is we're going to select our string and we're going to strip it. It means we're going to get rid of the empty spaces at the start and at the end, and then we could just call it trimmed _ stir. Now that we have that, let's go ahead and we also need to make sure if the string is empty, we don't do anything. So if the trimmed string is actually equal to an empty string, in this scenario, we just want to return an empty string. What I could do, I think it would make more sense, like you could do this. I think it makes more sense now that I'm thinking about it. If we put the strip function after this if statement. You know what? It's okay. In both scenarios, it's going to work. So what do we want to do next is, let's take a look at each individual word. So what I'm going to do is I am going to split this into multiple. It doesn't matter how many words there are in our input string. We're going to split it into multiple words, and we're going to find how do we split that. We take a look at the space. We have already talked about it. So let's create a variable. Let's call it words, and I'm going to grab my trimmed string and I'm going to call the split method. So this is going to basically split our input string into list of words at the white space. And this also handles, now this is Python. The syntax is sweeter. It's more concise. It's more beautiful. So what this function does, what this method does is it's going to handle multiple spaces as well. So if we have passed in cosmic radiation as a string, this is going to give us cosmic radiation as a list or an array of two items. One is cosmic, the other one is radiation. Now, what I'm going to do next is I'm going to grab each word and I'm going to capitalize the first letter of that. So I'm going to say I could say capped words or capitalized words. So I am going to create a list comprehension. That's going to do it very easily for us. A list comprehension in Python is basically, you could call it a Pythonic way to create lists. The way we do that is we transform or filter elements from an existing thing that is called an iterable. So our words are iterable. It means we can count them. That's what an iterable means in simple terms. So if we can count them, we can take a look at every individual thing. We can take a look at the first thing, the second thing, the third thing, however many things are in there, we call that one word individually. So thing one is word, thing two is also a word, and the thing three is also a word. So if that's a word, what do we want to do? We want to say capitalize. And that's it. So this is going to capitalize that for us. But we need to have our way of iterating over that. We don't have any for loop. So within this list comprehension, I'm going to say for word. Well, now what is this word? That's one thing within our array of words or list of words. Now this is going to create a list for us, and this is called the list comprehension syntax in Python. So let's go over this. We grab our words list or array, we iterate over it using this for in loop, and in each iteration we get this one word and we capitalize that word. And all of this at the end of the day is going to end up as a list because see, we are creating a list and we're going to store it within this variable capped words. So now that we have a list, we want to end up with a string. So how do we do that? Well, we basically say as many words as there are, we want to join them at an empty space. And join what? We want to join our capped words. There we go. And that's it. So I'm going to hit enter. You can see as soon as I did enter, it went out of the function because the return statement it should be the last thing within your function. Now let's grab our input string, which is cosmic radiation. Now I could select these two. You know what? Let me just copy them from there and put it right here. We're going to get rid of that, get rid of this, And let's just comment this, both of these out, comment this one back in. Let me just put it there. There we go. Let's save that. So we're going to grab our print method, cap first letter, and then you know what? If I want to go like other languages, I could say output cap first letter, and I'm going to pass in our input string. And I need to make sure that the name of this is snake case. There we go. Now let's run this, clear, and Python C, hit enter. Oh, we didn't print anything. Output. Save that. Let's run it again. There we go. So we have our cosmic radiation. The C is capital, the R is capital, and it doesn't matter how many spaces there are in between. We don't care. Now, let me comment this one out. Let's test it with this. Remove the first space. Python is really sensitive when it comes to white spaces because that's how indentation works. Indentation is basically adding white spaces, and that's all functions and if statements, basically all code blocks. That's how all of them work in Python. So let's run this again, and we have our cosmic radiation again, and that's very cool. And from this point onward, we're going to move on to the Go version of our challenge. For the Go solution, the first thing that we need to do is let's import our main package. Now I'm going to create a function much like the 3 previous languages, and the job of this function is to capitalize first letter. And what is this function going to accept? It's going to accept a string. The type of that string is going to be string, and this function is going to return a string as well for us. Within this function, the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to say if stir is equal to nothing, we basically want to return nothing. In Go, with our current implementation that I have in mind, we don't need to have a different method to trim the white spaces from the beginning and the end of the string. We have this fields method that is going to accept our input string, and this is basically going to split our input string into a slice of words. It's basically going to split our input string and put all the words, get rid of all of the spaces. It doesn't matter how many spaces there are. So even if between 2 words there is 1,000 spaces, it's going to get rid of them. And it's just going to return the words inside of a slice or an array or a list. And this fields function in Go is specifically designed to handle any type and amount of white spaces. So if there are tabs, there are spaces, new lines, doesn't matter, it's going to get rid of all of that for us. So for this reason, we don't need to come up with some sort of a trim method for Go to get rid of the starting spaces and the ending, because this fields method, it splits on those white spaces. So this is available on something that's called strings that we need to import it, and I just imported that. There we go. And then once I have this slice, I need to store it somewhere, and I could just store it here using the short variable declaration. There we go. Now, we have this slice, which is an iterable, meaning in simple English, it's countable. Not exactly that, but it's close to something that you can count. Now, I'm going to iterate over this. In each iteration, I'm going to get the index, and I'm going to get individual words. Now, keep in mind, we're not looking at individual characters of the words. We just look at individual words, and then we want to uppercase those words. So we're going to grab our short variable declaration again here. Using the range, we can iterate over the words. And in each iteration, what do we want to do? Basically, we want to select that individual word at that specific position, and then we want to uppercase it. So on the strings, we have this uppercase, it's 2 uppercase actually, 2 uppercase method, and this method is going to uppercase that specific thing that we pass it to here. So what do we want to uppercase? We want to uppercase the first letter of this word. And what is the index for that? The index for that is 0. Now, what about the rest of them? Do we want to uppercase the rest of them? No, we want to lowercase the rest of them. So I'm going to say strings dot lower dot to lower, and then let's pass in our word. And which ones do we want to lowercase? Well, we uppercase the one at position 0, but starting from position 1 all the way to end, we want to lowercase them. And that's it. And the reason that we have an error is because we're selecting individual words. We need to select the entire slice, and then once we hit, using this index, we hit a word, we need to capitalize the letter of that word, the first letter, and then we need to put it in its exact position. That's why I'm selecting the index. So I don't shuffle the string in the process. I end up with the same string that I have. I just capitalize the first word. Now let's move on and let's complete this challenge. Here I'm going to say return strings dot join. So what do I want to return? I want to return my slice, but in the form of, I've already done that, in the form of a string. And what do I want to join? Well, this join first needs to have that slice, that's words. And then, now keep in mind, within the slice, we got rid of all of the spaces. Now, these solutions are implemented a little bit different. In some solutions, we pass in, for example, in TypeScript, we passed in the empty space inside of that results array. But in here, we got rid of that empty space, so we need to pass it again. Now, you need to keep that in mind, all right? So here we have that. And what else? What is missing here? So it says undefined join. Whoa, this is, okay, that's a typo. So strings dot join. Very good. And finally, let's create the main entry point for our application. Don't forget that. And what do we want to do? We have this input, short variable declaration. Let's do the same thing that we did for JavaScript. We had this. Let's copy it. And I'm just going to put it right here. Get rid of that. And we have the output. And in the output, we call that cap first letter. And I'm going to pass in the input in there. And finally, okay, let me get rid of this. We just need to have one set of parentheses. And finally, we are going to say fmt.print line, and I'm going to pass in our output. Let's save that. There are no errors. Very good. There is something that I want to point out, but right after we get this challenge solved. And that's basically this part where we converted this word, this specific letter, into a string, but we didn't convert this one into a string. And you might have noticed that inconsistency. I'm going to come back to it. That's very, very important. So go run the tab, hit enter, wait a couple of seconds. And there we go. So we got our cosmic radiations. We have some spaces in between. It doesn't really matter. Now, I'm going to get this, come right here, copy this line, comment that one out. And let's just put that here. So this has all of the issues. We have the starting and ending spaces. We have inconsistent casing. So let's see how this program is going to solve that for us. Cosmic radiations. Perfect. So our application works. Now, what was the thing that I wanted to talk about? Now in here, we have this words, which is a slice. We have this to upper. We know that. Let me show it to you like this. So this to upper is a method that is available on the strings package that we imported right here. Cool. We passed in this individual letter to the string method. The string method converts this into a string. The reason that I did that was because this to upper, it requires a string. This is essentially, you could call this word, this first index, the 0, you could call this a byte or a rune. That's why we convert it to a string and then we pass it to the upper method. Because this to upper, it doesn't require a byte or a rune, it requires a string. Now, this is a single one. That's why it's a byte. That's a single one. But in here, are we talking about a single character? No, we're talking about a range of characters, aka a substring. So this is not a byte or a rune, or this is not bytes or runes. This is already a substring. It's a range of characters. We say start from index 1 and go all the way to the end. It doesn't matter how many letters are there within that specific string. So it becomes a substring. That doesn't matter. But what matters is the type of this is already a string. So that's why we pass it to lower. To lower needs a string as well. Since this is already a substring, we just pass it there. We don't need to convert it like we did here. We do not need this in here. So this is something that I thought was important for you to understand about Go and the way that we came up with our solution. So let's jump into the last language of this series. There we go. That's Rust. So for this one, we are going to create, so far you know that we have this capitalize first letter function. This is going to accept a string. Now, since I don't want this string to take ownership, I'm going to pass in a string slice. But what this generates is going to be an owned string. I've already talked about all of this when I talked about the data types for Rust. In Rust, we also have a method that works like the fields method that we talked about in Go, like this method. And we do have almost the same thing in Rust. But before jumping and talking about that, let's say if stir is empty, we have this method that's called isEmpty. What do we want to do? We do not want to do anything. So if stir is equal to an empty string, we just want to return, we could return an owned string, which is a new string or an empty string. That's it. We don't want to do anything. Let me terminate this statement as well here. Now, let's get back to where we were. So we have this stir, and on this, we're going to say split underscore white space. And this method, what this is going to do is it's going to automatically trim the beginning or leading white space as well as the ending or the trailing white space. It will also handle multiple spaces if there are between words. So if there is one white space between the words, or if there are several, it's going to handle that, and it's going to give us basically an array of string slices, and then we can iterate over that array. So what I'm going to do is, let's come right here. I am going to, we could just do it on this. So I'm going to say map, or I could just hit enter and I'm going to say map. So we're going to map over this, and this map method, this is basically going to be a method, and we use this map method to transform the letters of the words that we put inside of that array of string slices. And how do we do that? Well, we are basically going to take a look at something that's called a closure in Rust. And a closure in Rust, even though it has a fancy name, it's a very simple thing. It's basically an anonymous function. And what it means is it doesn't have a name. And the syntax for it is a little bit different if you haven't seen something like this. So this anonymous function is going to accept one parameter. And the way we pass it is between these pipe characters. So this is going to be one anonymous function or a closure for us. And it is going to take one parameter, and the name of that parameter is word. So what is this closure going to do for us? We are going to grab our word, and we want to basically create an iterator from this word. The reason that we want to create an iterator is because we want to take a look at the first character, capitalize that, but then also lowercase all of the other letters. of that. So I'm going to say chars, and this is going to create an iterator. I'm going to store this iterator inside of this chars. Let's grab our initialization keyword. Now, this is going to be changing, so I'm going to add in the mutable keyword because this will change for us. We need to terminate this here as well. Now, next up, we are going to take a look at the match construct of Rust. That is this keyword, and this is basically a pattern matching in Rust. You could take a look, you could think of this as a switch statement inside of JavaScript. And what it does is it's always going to take a look at the next iteration of our characters. Because once I said word.chars, this is very important for us because we want to create an iterator and we want to advance it. So we want to go from the first letter to the second letter. But what is the second letter? The second letter is going to be this next. How do we reach that? That's going to be the next method for us. Now, if we hit a character, what do we do with that? We take a look at if that's the first character. If it is the first character, we want to uppercase that. But what about if it is not the first character? So for all of the remaining characters, we want to lowercase that. So in here, I'm going to say sum. This is going to basically take a look at our hit when we find the first character. And sum is basically a pattern for when the iterator has a character. If C is the first character, we're going to uppercase that. So I'm going to say let first, that has a type of string, we are going to uppercase it. So I'm going to say dot to underscore upper case. Now keep in mind, this is still an iterator. We need to convert it to a string. So I'm going to say collect, and that is going to convert it for us to a string. Now, what if this is not the first character? If this is not the first character, I don't care which character that is. I just want to convert it to lowercase. So for this one, I'm going to say however many characters there are, we're going to convert them to lowercase. Now you might be asking, how do you know which is the first one, which is the last one? We call the next. Once we call the next, the first thing that we hit is going to be the character that we want to uppercase. And now we need to come up with another function that is going to handle the remainder of the characters for us. And for that one, I'm going to use a method that is called flat underscore map. And within here, we're going to create another anonymous function that is going to have the C, which stands for a specific character. And we want to basically lowercase it. So the method is lowercase. Now, again, we want to convert it to a string. So we use our collect method. Let me terminate that, terminate this one as well. And let's join the first and the last. Now keep in mind, the first is the first character or the first letter. The rest is the rest of the letters. So now we need to put in the first letter as right next to the rest of the letters. So I'm going to say first the plus, which is for concatenation, and I'm going to pass in rest. Now there is something wrong with this code. What is wrong with this code is the plus operator in Rust, it requires a string on the left, which we have a string on the left, but then it requires a string slice on the right. How do you convert it to a slice? We just pass in the ampersand. There we go. Now, what if this match pattern doesn't work? We don't have any match. We need to consider that as well. And for that, we have this none, and we basically say return a new string or an empty string. Basically, return an empty string. And this none is a pattern for when the iterator is empty. We have 0 characters. Now, this is something that I'm just going to pass in here, and this is going to handle if there is no character or if there is a white space. Now we have already handled that white space right here. It's rare that we're going to end up with a white space here, but I mean, it doesn't hurt. We could just pass it right there. Now that we have all of these characters right next to their words, we need to grab all of their words and we need to combine that as well. Now, we did for characters, we did collect. We're going to do the same thing for words as well. So I am going to get out of this stir.whitespace, get out of the map method. I'm going to come right down here and I'm going to say dot collect, and we are going to collect them as a vector. And I'm just going to pass in here the vector type. Sorry, it's going to be the vector type, and I'm going to pass in an underscore right here. Let's call this method as well. Now, the reason that we pass in, or basically collect them as a vector type is because you need to keep in mind what the map method produces. It produces an iterator of processed words, or basically, how can I show that to you? So right here, if I just comment this, this is what the map method is going to produce for us. It's going to say cosmos or cosmic, and then it's going to produce radiations like that. Now, that is going to be an iterator of the words that we basically processed. Now, we want to collect all of these iterators into a vector that has a type of string. I'm passing an underscore here because since the iterator is of type string, I want the vector to infer the type of that for me. And after it does that, it generates a string, a concrete list of strings. And once it generated that, we can just say join it at what? Now, keep in mind, what did it generate? We don't have any white spaces inside of our array. We don't have any white spaces inside of our iterator. Keep that in mind. So if we don't have any white spaces and we want to join this, we need to add that white space. And that's it. Let's create the entry point for this app, for this program as well. We have our input, which I'm just going to pass in right here. We have our output, which I'm going to pass in here. This is going to be cap first letter, and I'm going to pass in the input here. And then let's grab our macro print line. And then what do we want to print? Now for this, the display specifier is going to be enough. And I just want to pass in the output. So let's grab our input. The first one is going to be this one. Let's pass that there. Let's terminate this statement as well. Terminate this one as well. Let's save this. Rust C E tab, hit enter. There seems to be something wrong in here. Let's see what that is. So let's try to fix this. So we have this that ends here. We have these two. This one is extra. Let's get rid of that. I'm going to save this. All right. So we have this inner angle brackets, and then we have the outer angle brackets. That one is fixed. Main function found in not found. If in main, well, I did specify that there. And then we have the other function as well. So here is the main function. Oh, this should be a macro for us. Let's save that as well. We do have a main function. Is it fn main? Yeah, it's okay. So let me run this again. Clear this. Let's run it again. And there we go. Now it compiled. Very good. And now let's run this executable. It's going to be E tab, hit run. There we go. We got cosmic radiations. Very good. So we have a lot of spaces in between. It didn't care about those. Let me just add the other test as well. And hopefully we're good to go. Just add that, save it. So now we have spaces at the start and at the end as well. And we have a lot of spaces in the middle. We have inconsistent casing as well. Let me just first do this and then run this. And there we go. There we go. Very good. Now I forgot to actually test this for when there is an empty string. How is that going to handle that for us? So let's just pass in an empty string. It shouldn't do anything. And you can see it didn't do anything. What if I pass in an empty string with a space. Now, it doesn't matter if there is one space or a ton of them. It shouldn't matter. Let me save this. Let's run this again. And there we go. See, before wrapping this video up, so this Rust is done completely. Let's jump into the Go one. And for this one, I'm also going to first do this and then do this. Let's clear this, go run. You can see it doesn't do anything. And what if I do this? Let's run it and nothing. Very good. Let's take a look at the Python one. Comment this one in, and we have this as well. So let's save that. I'm going to say Python, nothing. That was the last, or it should have been the first edge case that I checked. Okay, what about TypeScript? Where are you? Let's bring it down. Very good. And this one, comment the below one, and we are going to say TSC. Node, nothing. Very good. You can see the behavior is the same for all languages, and that's a good thing. Node, very good. We don't have any errors. We have nothing. And let's take a look at the final one, JavaScript. Let me get rid of that and this. Save that, and I'm going to say Node A, nothing. Very good. Save that, rerun this. Very good. So with this, our 6th challenge has come to an end. I really enjoyed creating this challenge, and I enjoyed even more teaching it. See you in the next one.